Welcome to the Talking Toughness series of podcasts, where we examine the mental toughness concept with guests from a wide range of sectors, illustrating that our mental approach to what happens to us and around us matters for all of us. Our guests come from the worlds of business and public service, education, social mobility, sport, and health. They all share their experiences and their observations about the factors that have enabled them to survive and to thrive on their journey through life. Many guests have gone further and incorporated the concept into what they do as coaches, trainers, managers, and leaders, helping others to thrive in their turn. Their experiences are valuable to those of us who strive to do the same. I'm just picking up on, I completely agree with this. When you say leadership is about performance, it's about wearing the mask. How do you reconcile, or how would you reconcile that with quite a lot of people who see authenticity as something again that?
Okay, so I love authentic leadership. All right, so authentic leader. I tell you, Genghis Khan was an authentic leader.
Yeah.
Lots of psychopaths are authentically psychopathic. So let's have an even more authentically psychopath. That's good. It's like, okay, so what do we mean by authentic leadership? Okay. I mean, I see so many authentic leaders who look, Boris Johnson was authentic. I'll give him that 100% of the work. I mean, the one thing Boris was good at was being Boris, right? And some people loved it. A lot of people didn't. So authentic leadership, yeah, fine. If that authenticity is good. If it's not good, then it's even worse. So that's where we now stumble across one of the paradoxes of leadership, which is this: you can't succeed by being somebody else. Right? So that is where authenticity comes in. If you try to be someone that you're not, you're going to fail because you are who you are. But equally, if you try to succeed just by being yourself, like a teenager in full hormonal angst, waiting for the world to recognize your innate brilliance, genius, and humanity, you're going to be in for a very long wait. So we're kind of stuffed, aren't we? Because now you can't succeed by being somebody else, and you can't succeed just by being yourself. So the kind of obvious answer that I think everyone's probably guessed already is that you succeed by being the best of who you are, which sounds easy, but is incredibly difficult because actually people are often quite bad at identifying their own strengths and learning from success. We all talk about you've got to work on your weaknesses and learn from failure. Well, what a nightmare. What a painful and miserable way to learn. And what's this about? All these HR systems, you've got to address your weaknesses. Hello, that is such a bad idea. It's like, presumably these are the people who, if they were coaching Olympic weightlifters, would come along and say, well, I've been looking at your weightlifting skills, but you know what? In terms of the Olympics, your synchronized swimming skills are a bit weak. So I think we're going to have to work on your synchronized swimming skills. No, forget that. You're a weightlifter. Start, lifting weights. What do they do? Okay. That's all. And when it comes to, your weaknesses as a leader, how do you deal with those? Okay. So big lessons here. First is this, that any weaknesses you have get massively amplified and exposed as you sort of go through the ranks, because at junior levels, you're living in the shadows and those development opportunities, okay, they're there, but they're sort of relatively minor. You can find roles and it don't matter and fine. When you get into leadership, you're now in the spotlight, center stage. And those minor flaws become very visible and everyone talks about them. Not to your face, behind your back, okay? Because you're the leaders and they're not going to talk to your face. So what do you do about that? Well, the first thing is to recognize that there's no such thing as a perfect leader. It simply doesn't exist. Okay. If you look at the leadership literature, the leaders are meant to be a cornucopia of contradictions. They're meant to be empowering and controlling, big picture and detailed, task focused and people focused, numerate and literate, and just creative and disciplined. It's just this mishmash of all these different bits and pieces of good leaders. You can't be all of those things. Okay. So that means every leader has weaknesses, and that's fine, because leadership is a team sport. If you can't do it, other people can fill in for you. So for instance, I can do accounting, but actually I hate accounting. I hate it, right? It's boring to me. Bizarrely, there are people who love accounting, and apparently they're called accountants. So if I hate accounting, you know what? I love accountants. I love them because they can do the stuff that I hate. Leadership is a team sport. Don't do it all yourself. That then sounds easy, but raises big questions about, well, so actually, what are you good at? How are you going to make a difference? What is the value you are going to add? Because if you have, one of the jobs of a leader is to build a brilliant team. If you've built a brilliant team around you that can do everything, then what's the point of you? Can't the team do it for you? Now, there are answers to all of that, but as a leader, you have to think very clearly and very carefully about what is the value that you bring to the rest of the team. And one of the answers that often comes up by default, especially for middle leaders, is, well, of course, I will take on the most challenging and difficult tasks because, that's my job. No, it isn't, right? If you do that, you're taking away the most interesting work from your team. You're taking away the work that will stretch them, develop them, and grow them. And you're telling your team that you don't trust them. And you're giving yourself a recipe for late nights, stress, and anxiety. So actually, you have to be prepared to give away everything, which gets into the whole delegation challenge of what do you delegate? And if you ask, well, what can I delegate? You come up with a very short list, okay, because you realize that actually this is far too important, this is far too urgent. Only I can do this, right? There's always a reason why you can't delegate stuff. So you don't delegate. Instead, you have to ask the opposite question, which is this: what is it absolutely impossible for me to delegate? What is it impossible for me to delegate? And if you ask that question, again, you come up with a pretty short list and you begin to discover what is it that you as a manager or a leader can do and where can you add value. But this is one of those really difficult things that all leaders and all managers face. Now, what am I good at? What am I really good at? What do I need to be good at in future? And where do I really add value? And if you can figure out the answers to those, you're doing better than most managers and you're on the high road to success. But they're not easy questions to answer. Sorry, that's
fine. That's perfect. That's hugely interesting. You've mentioned development several times. And of course, true development is an individual experience.
Yep.
And completely agree, one size doesn't fit all. And there's been a wonderful piece of research just come out of Oxford University, which has confirmed that. They've looked at 143 well-being programs and found that not one was effective and that some were actually potentially harmful.
Yeah.
So, and one of the key observations was they were all one size fits all programs. But you've also got some interesting views about the things that potential leaders should be working on, either developing themselves or getting developed. So I'm going to lead you into this. How do you ramp up leadership skills?
So, okay. Leadership is one of those odd things that can't be taught but must be learned. And there are quite a lot of things in life that can't be taught but must be learned. Leadership is one of them. So if that is the case, then actually, as an emerging leader, you've got to get the right experiences. So I often in groups ask leaders, how did you learn to lead? Right? How have you learned to lead? And yeah, this, as a middle manager, you've got leadership experience. So how have you learned to lead? And I give people 6 options, and you may want to do this quiz yourself now. So give yourself 2 votes, pick 2 of the following 6 options as to how you have learned to lead. I'm going to have to remember the 6 options. Here we go. 1, books. 2, courses. 3, bosses, good and bad lessons. 4, role models, inside and outside work. 5, peers, colleagues, your own level. And 6, personal experience. So when I do, so I'll just give that again. You can give you, so you can think about which you'd pick. Books, courses, bosses, role models, peers, and experience. Okay. Now, when I do this with groups, the results are more or less inevitable. Books and courses get virtually null point, no votes, which is a bit of a disaster for an author that leads courses. Okay? Then bosses, peers, and role models get quite a lot of hands each, and experience gets a forest of hands. So that actually makes perfect sense, because that's how we learn. We learn from personal experience and observed experience. If we see someone do something smart, we go, oh yeah, I might try that. And if we see someone sort of spectacularly blow up, we go, actually, I'll tell you what, I don't think I'll repeat that mistake. Thank you very much. I'll make my own. Okay. And slowly we work out, this is what works for me in my context. So it is really helpful and really good learning. It's totally contextualized, totally relevant, and totally credible. Brilliant. But, I think you could hear the but coming from a mile off. It's a very slow way of learning, and it's a very painful way of learning. Boy, is it a painful way of learning from experience, and slow. And nowadays, people don't want to progress slowly. So the question is, how can you... Oh, and it's also a random walk, right? So if you bump into good bosses, role models, and experience, you accelerate your career. If you bump into poor bosses, role models, and experience, you land up in a career dead end. And a random walk is not a good way to manage your career. So you've now got 2 challenges. How do you structure your learning so it's not a random walk? And how do you accelerate your learning? And the answer to that, so suddenly this is where books and courses come in, right? You can't start a book on page 1 and finish on page 278 as a great leader. Unless, of course, it's one of my books. Sorry, I have to say that, otherwise my publisher will be very upset. Yeah, that just isn't going to happen. But what the books and courses can do is they can put some structure on that random walk, and they can help you make sense of the nonsense you encounter from day to day. So, yeah, that really helps. And then there's something you can do to really accelerate your learning. Because if we're going to learn from experience, you've actually got to make sure you really actively learn from experience. Okay, you don't just sort of bump into experience, learn from it. So here's what I get people to do, both for themselves and for their teams. After any significant event, which could be an important phone call, it could be a meeting, it could be a presentation, after anything significant like that, just take anything from 30 seconds to 3 minutes to ask 2 questions. WWW and EBI. Right, so WWW is what went well. Capture yourself succeeding. Yeah, so if something worked, we think that's natural. It isn't natural. Things are always going wrong. So if something worked, you did something to make it work. Figure out what that was, bottle it, learn it, and reuse it. That's your secret sauce. It's really helpful to get it. So what went well, both for yourself and for your team? Okay. And then people say, well, yeah, but what if it was all, went a bit awry? I say, that's even more important that you should start with what went well. Because in that difficult meeting, you probably did something well that made sure the difficult meeting didn't become a disastrous meeting. And that's like gold dust. So again, bottle that and learn that. And don't start with WWW's evil twin, what went wrong, because that is a recipe for politics and backstabbing, and you're not going to learn anything. So start with what went well. Right? There it says, yeah, but what about all the bad stuff? And so, okay, here's what you do. Ask even better if. So it would have been even better if. Let me give you an example. So I do this with senior sales teams, often experienced sales teams. And after a call, we'll come back and do the what went well, and then we'll get on to the even better if. And the even better ifs will be things like, well, it would be even better if I'd actually done a little bit more preparation on the background of the bar. It would be a bit better if I'd asked slightly smarter questions. It would be even better if I just listened a little bit more as opposed to sort of pitching my ideas. It's just great. And people learn from that. Go, yeah, that would make sense. Okay, these are experienced people. Now turn that around. In the traditional debrief, it would have been, why didn't you prepare better? Why didn't you ask some smart questions? Why didn't you just shut up and listen for a bit? Right? And once you're into that sort of debrief, you're not into a debrief, you're into a fight. You're not going to learn anything. It's going to be a bare knuckle fight. What do you mean I didn't listen? Of course I was listening. Weren't you listening? Yeah, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So if you want to learn, yes, you've got books and courses and all that. Actually, your biggest resource is yourself. So you've got to be active in your learning. Active learning. WWW-EBI. That's how you'll discover your own secret source of success. And that's how you'll capture yourself succeeding. Yeah, you'll learn from setbacks as well. Of course you will, but learn from success. That's really important.
Once again, Jo, you've produced a perfect explanation for one of the mental toughness factors. We call it learning orientation. Right. Unfortunately, what we do know is it's normally distributed. So some people are good at it, some aren't. So
and so I think one of the things you've got to do. So let me just pick up on that. I think there's an awful lot of stuff in this space around learning and growth and resilience and well-being and mental toughness, which is sort of, some people sort of talk about it as if it's innate characteristics. And I go, no, it isn't. All of this stuff can be learned, all of it. So, in one of my books on resilience, I talk about courage and how in lots of different contexts. And I was doing a workshop on this, and someone said, "Oh yeah, well that's all very clever. You say you can learn everything, but you can't learn courage, can you?" I went, "Oh blimey, that's a tough one." Fortunately, the head of the local county fire service was at the back, so I said to the head of county fire service, "So how do you get all your firemen to do all these brave things?" So he gets up and says, "Well, first thing I want everyone to know in this room is a brave fireman is a dead fireman, and dead fireman is no good for me, so I don't want brave firemen." Oh, blimey, this is not going well. So I said, "Well, fine. How do you get them to go into burning buildings, smoke-filled buildings, and all that stuff?" He said, "Well, that's easy." He said, when a new recruit comes, day one, we'll teach them how to put on some basic kit. Day two, we might get them to put out a fire in a chip pan. Day three, we might get them to learn how to use a step ladder carefully, and then slowly the kit gets more sophisticated, the fires get more complicated, and the ladders get longer. And after a year or so, they're able to a burning building, walking into burning building is like walking into an office. So then I was down at Port Lympstone, home of the Royal Marines. I said, "Well, how do you get your Royal Marines to do really crazy dangerous stuff, because they're the first in and last out into deeply dangerous, ambiguous situations?" He said, "Well, actually, it's pretty easy, relentless. The pre-fitness training program starts with a 1 mile run in 8 minutes, which even Grandad can do on a good day. And slowly we ramp up the fitness requirements, the technical requirements, and everything else in a very supervised, controlled way. And after 15 months in intense training, the people who pass can do all this crazy difficult stuff. So in both cases, they've learned courage. They've learned courage. But what's interesting is the courage is completely contextual. So I was speaking with a wonderful adventurer whose idea of a weekend away is to go into the middle of the bloody desert. No water, no food, no directions, nothing. It's a really hostile environment, but he thinks, let's just stay out. I go, well, how on earth do you do all this stuff? He said, well, to me, it's easy. I've been doing it all the time. He said, but, he said, if you asked me to sell double glazing, I wouldn't survive a day. So all this courage, it's like even courage can be learned, but it's contextual. And I think that's true of most of the things that we're talking about, whether it's resilience, well-being, mental toughness, etc. You can learn it. Now, you may not, it's like learning the piano. A little bit of learning will take you a long way. You're probably, not many of us are going to learn it to such a degree that we're going to be playing the piano in Carnegie Hall or anything like that, but we don't need to be, right? We need to achieve a level of proficiency that is sufficient for us to navigate life successfully. That's so the goal isn't to become the world's most mentally tough or the world's most resilient person, whatever it is. That's not the goal. The goal is to be able to navigate life well, and for that you need acquire a certain level of proficiency in terms of mental toughness skills, resilience skills, well-being skills.
Yeah, I think it's a great way of explaining it, and I really like the courage example. It reminds me actually of when Peter Clough started out exploring what he thought mental toughness was. Initially, he thought, marathon runners, they must be tough because running a marathon's really hard. And over many interviews of marathon runners, what he found was they're good at running marathons, and because they're good at running, they enjoy it. Feelings of mastery and competence and all that kind of stuff. So actually, that's not toughness as such. That's just they appear tough because they have that belief that they know they're good at something. I often try and make this distinction. So I work a lot in sport settings, and there's a lot of unsubstantiated assumption made between sport developing character and being good for you and stuff like that, which looks, sometimes it does when the environment's right, and sometimes it doesn't. A lot of the time what it does is those tough environments select the tough ones. They don't develop the tough ones. You simply lose incredibly talented, sensitive people. Because the environment just selects, it's like a blunt tool.
Exactly. Yeah. No, and then the environment normalizes certain behaviors where you just go, and I was thinking to people, the high divers, it's like, they said, well, weird behavior became normalized, that it was normal to get to the pool at 4 o'clock in the morning, when you, that was just accepted, that's what you did. And it was normal that actually, you don't eat Christmas dinner because that's going to muck up your routine. And it's like, well, actually, it's not normal, to be honest.
Yeah. Not much about elite sport is normal.
I think that's the point, isn't it?
We've taken a lot of your time. I've got one last question for you. Oh, it's not a question. It's inviting you to talk about something you've put a lot of thought into, and that's RAMP.
Yeah.
And it's about your views on motivation, intrinsic and extrinsic motivation.
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? We've had, 50, 60 years of the motivation industry with brilliant people coming up with brilliant ideas and doing great stuff and all these theories. And now you look at the latest Gallup State of the Workplace, Global Workplace report, and levels of motivation and engagement at all-time record lows. Just think about that. 60 years for the motivation industry, and motivation and engagement are at all-time record lows. And it's not because the people in the motivation industry are charlatans or stupid, but it says that something is fundamentally broken. And I think the fundamental issue is that we assume that motivation is something you can do to people, which is nonsense, right? You cannot tell someone to be motivated, positive, or happy. Well, you can, but it's not going to work, right? Motivation comes from within. Now, if we accept that, then it's not about how do I motivate you, or how can we develop motivational managers. The locus of control has to move from the external environment to the internal world. So how do we create the environment in which individuals will rediscover their intrinsic motivation? Because all of us are intrinsically motivated, professionals especially. We want to do good jobs. So this is a challenge we faced when one of the charities I started, we decided to address the UN Strategic Development Goal 4, which, amongst others, said the challenge is 600 million kids in school but not learning. And we said, well, how do you affect that? And everyone's saying, well, the teachers are the problem because they're just useless. And we said, no, the teachers are not the problem. There is no solution to that problem without the teachers. So the teachers are the solution. So let's recast this as, how do we get millions of teachers re-engaged, remotivated, revitalized, so they're actually delivering the education that these 600 million kids need? Because if the teachers are motivated, kids will respond. So how do you motivate millions of teachers and officials and head teachers around the world? And how do you do it affordably? Because if your intervention just costs a measly $10 per child per year, you have to raise $6 billion a year. That ain't gonna work, right? So what we've been at this now for 12 years. We've gone through endless iterations, mistakes, errors. We've now worked out how to do it. Here's how you create the environment in which you develop system level in motivation. What I mean by that is you create a system in which individuals will rediscover their intrinsic motivation. You've got to put 4 conditions in place, which I call the ramp model. First, R for positive relationships. Positive relationships, not traditional command and control, which are not positive relationships, okay? And it's positive relationships both vertically, up and down the hierarchy, and horizontally with your peers. So the teachers are no longer islands working in their own classroom, but a part of a network, okay? So already we're onto a revolution. That's the first bit. Second bit is autonomy. Professionals hate being micromanaged. Often the best way to manage a professional is to manage them less. Show that you trust them, give them autonomy, give them responsibility, let them get on with it. And again, in the schools environment, that's revolution. It's about letting go. And schools and officials in particular hate letting go, but you can do that, right? The third, M, for mastery. It's very difficult to feel motivated if you lack the skills for today's job and you're not growing the skills for tomorrow's job, okay? So again, you can put in programs which are not about formal training programs. We've talked about that before. It's about helping people learn from experience and learn from their peers. Right? We talked about that before. And it's saying once you get them learning from peers, learn in networks, you massively accelerate the positive relationships and you massively amplify the autonomy. So those 3 things work together. And the final one is purpose and meaning. So how do you actually develop purpose and meaning? That is a whole nother long story, and it's probably the hardest of the 4 of them. Interestingly, Unilever has been running a purpose program for the last 2 or 3 years successfully. So you can help people discover their purpose. And again, purpose tends to be intrinsic. So purpose isn't about the great corporate mission statement, because frankly, nobody gives a monkeys about the corporate mission statement that you have created. Mission comes from 2 other levels. First is your personal mission. That's the whole job crafting agenda that's kind of well known and established. We'll talk about that separately. The piece that's often missing is that often teams can find a real sense of purpose. So forget the corporate mission. The team mission can be vital, because now the team is working towards a meaningful and common goal. And I guess what that also fosters the very positive relationships as well. So think of those 4 bits. If you can put those 4 bits in at a system level, positive relationships, autonomy, mastery, and purpose, you're going to have a high-performing, well, highly motivated and highly performing system. And the good news on that is that, well, it kind of blows up the motivation industry, because it's no longer about, I am going to motivate you. It becomes much more managerial, and it says there are 4 levers that I as a manager can pull. I can systemically put in programs that encourage the development of positive relationships, encourage autonomy, build mastery, and help people discover their individual purpose. That's doable. That's doable, as opposed to somehow demanding that managers become motivational and inspirational and charismatic. Look, managers have enough things to worry about, like the month-end close and meeting budget and all that kind of good stuff. So we really shouldn't be putting that on them as well. It is our responsibility to find our own motivation. But as managers, we've got to create the environment in which people can do that. We've got to move on from what the motivation industry has been trying to achieve for the last 60, 70 years. New world.
Thank you, Joe. Every little bit I found some little gem to sort of take home and think about. I think the listeners will as well. I love some of your ideas, learning to dance in the sun and in the rain, and teabag leadership. I hadn't come across that one before, but I love that.
Great. Well, thank you for having me. Absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Joe.
Pleasure's ours, Joe.